In a city where luxury high-rises cast long shadows over crumbling neighborhoods, an unlikely meeting set the stage for a life-changing miracle. 12-year-old Amara lived in a rundown apartment with peeling paint and broken windows. Her mother worked double shifts at a diner, and every night they scraped together whatever food remained to survive. But Amara was no ordinary girl. Despite the hardships, she radiated a quiet strength, sharp eyes, untamed braids, and an unshakable faith in miracles. A few blocks away, billionaire entrepreneur Victor Delacroix sat motionless in a mansion overlooking the city. Paralyzed from the neck down after a tragic plane crash 3 years prior, he hadn't spoken to the media or left his home since. Once known for building tech empires and giving stirring speeches, now he was a ghost behind glass, guarded by iron gates and despair. The encounter. It was the third day Amara had stood outside the Delacroix estate. She had overheard rumors at the diner, stories of how the paralyzed millionaire refused visitors, how he no longer believed in people or miracles. But she was desperate. Her mother's heart condition had worsened, and their cupboards were bare. Amara clutched a small Tupperware of cold mac and cheese, last night's leftovers. The guards laughed at her. "You want to trade leftovers for a miracle," one sneered. "Go home, kid." But she didn't move. Then an odd thing happened. A voice crackled through the speaker at the gate. "Let her in." Amara's heart pounded as the gate creaked open. The laugh. Inside, the mansion was cathedral-like. Tall ceilings, marble floors, and the hush of money that had long outlived joy. Victor Delacroix sat in a reclining wheelchair, tubes attached to his body, a silent nurse by his side. His eyes locked onto the girl approaching him, this tiny stranger holding a container of food like it was treasure. "I heard you used to make impossible things happen," she said. "I brought you something. It's not much, but maybe if you eat it, something good will happen. Maybe even a miracle." Victor stared at her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, he laughed. It was dry and bitter, like something breaking loose. "You brought me cold mac and cheese. In exchange for what? A cure? A donation? A fairy tale?" Amara didn't flinch. "No, I brought it because miracles don't come in gold. Sometimes they come when someone gives the only thing they have." Victor's laughter stopped. For the first time in years, he felt something. The shift. That night, he asked the nurse to heat the food. He tasted it, not because he thought it would heal him, but because he was curious. And then something happened. Not to his body, but to his soul. He asked for her name. He asked where she lived. He asked why no one had ever brought him anything so honest before. Over the next week, Amara visited again and again, bringing nothing but leftover meals and stories. Victor listened, really listened. His mind, once clouded by bitterness, began to spark again. Within 2 months, Victor launched a new foundation, the Amara Project. Its first initiative? A mobile medical unit that would visit underprivileged neighborhoods to provide free care, starting with Amara's mother, who was soon placed on the list for a life-saving heart surgery. But that wasn't all. The miracle. One morning, while laughing at a joke Amara had told, Victor twitched. It was his finger. Then, slowly, more muscle stirred. Doctor confirmed it. Neural pathways were reactivating. Whether it was a joy, the purpose, or a shift in his neuroplasticity triggered by human connection, no one knew for sure. Victor walked again 6 months later. The first place he walked to was Amara's school. Standing at the auditorium podium, he introduced her as the miracle that traded macaroni for movement. And she smiled, because in her heart, she knew miracles weren't about science or luck. They were about giving what you have, even when it's not enough, to remind someone else they are still alive inside. Though Amara's life changed after that day. Not instantly, not with the flash and glory of fairy tales, but with a slow and steady weight of transformation. The neighborhood she once walked through with downcast eyes began to notice her. Strangers on the street pointed, not with judgment, but with awe. "That's the girl," they whispered, "the one who healed the stone man." She hated the spotlight, but she understood its purpose. If her story could open hearts, then she'd stand in the light until others could stand beside her. Victor, too, was changing. Every step he took with his recovering body was like a lesson in humility. He had once believed in algorithms, systems, and control. Now he believed in grace. He no longer looked at the world as a map of market opportunities, but as a canvas of unmet needs. Where others saw risk, he saw potential, especially in the faces of children who reminded him of Amara. He opened youth centers. He gave speeches not about profits, but about purpose. He stopped wearing suits and started wearing hoodies, walking among people he'd once seen only from the window of a limousine. Amara still visited him. They talked about everything. The book she was reading, the way the rain danced on the diner's roof, the jokes her mother told at night. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with fire, she asked him, "What made you let me in that day?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because you weren't afraid to treat me like a man, not a myth. Everyone else tiptoed. You just walked." And she smiled. Sometimes people forget that broken things don't need pity. They need company. But the world wasn't all soft miracles and kind turns. Not everyone celebrated Victor's transformation. There were board members who resented his shift away from profit. Media tycoons who questioned the sincerity of his change. And there were whispers, deep in the corridors of power, that Victor was losing his edge, that kindness was weakness, that softness was suicide in a capitalist jungle. "You're throwing away your empire," a former partner told him. Victor just smiled. "I'm building something better." And then came the fire. It started in the lower district, a faulty heater in a forgotten tenement building. Flames rose like devils, swallowing homes and hope. Amara was there, volunteering at the shelter, when the smoke thickened the sky. She didn't run. She ran in. Room by room, voice by voice, she led people out. She didn't make it out before the roof caved in. Victor saw the news as he was boarding a plane for a tech conference in Geneva. The moment he heard her name, he turned around, silent as ice, and ordered the jet back. When he arrived, the hospital lights flickered like stars caught in grief. Amara was alive, but barely. Burned hands, cracked ribs, smoked lungs. She saved 17 people, the nurse whispered. 17. Victor didn't cry, but he sat by her bed for 3 days without moving. And then, on the morning of the 4th day, she opened her eyes. "You came," she rasped. "I never left," he said. That moment was the birth of something greater than any charity or campaign. Victor announced the Phoenix Fund, a $1 billion initiative to rebuild the city's most vulnerable neighborhoods, not with concrete and cameras, but with the people who lived there. He gave Amara's name to a new scholarship, a hospital wing, and a children's writing program, because Amara never stopped writing, even when her fingers were in bandages. She wrote stories about people like her, poor girls with big hearts, cold leftovers that fed souls, paralyzed men who remembered how to stand. And still, they met every week. Older now, she with her cane and notebook, he with his trembling hands and a smile no longer hardened by wealth. They sat on the same bench outside the youth center and talked about rain, laughter, and miracles. The city watched them and wondered how it had all begun. And the answer was always the same. With a little girl, with a container of mac and cheese, with a question no one else had dared to ask. Months passed like soft shadows stretching across the calendar of life. Amara recovered slowly, her body marked with scars but her spirit brighter than ever. Her story was now known far beyond her city, shared on news broadcasts, quoted in classrooms, whispered in hushed voices between children who dared to believe that small acts could change the world. But even with the tension circling her like a halo, Amara remained grounded. She still lived in the same neighborhood, though the buildings were now freshly painted and the playgrounds rebuilt. She still ate simple dinners with her mother, and she still visited Victor Delacroix every Friday without fail. Victor, for his part, had grown into something entirely new. He was no longer a billionaire in a mansion. He had sold most of his companies, poured his wealth into human-centered initiatives, and moved into a modest home close to the communities he served. He no longer needed luxury. He needed meaning. And every time he looked at Amara, he remembered why. Together, they had sparked a movement that others were now joining. Teachers, volunteers, doctors, artists, young people who once had nothing now had classrooms, gardens, studios, and safe homes. But not everyone liked this new tide. The powerful forces Victor had once worked alongside, the politicians, the lobbyists, the developers, began to push back. They didn't like how he had turned against the system that had made him rich. They whispered that he had been manipulated by a child. They hinted at investigations, cut off partnerships, and threatened the very programs that had changed so many lives. They wanted control back. They wanted to erase a miracle and return to the machine. Victor stood firm. So did Amara. Together, they held a press conference beneath the branches of a massive oak tree in the center of the city, the same tree where Amara had once read her poems to the wind, unnoticed. Now, with hundreds watching and cameras flashing, she read a new poem written in the hospital during her recovery. It was called Roots and Fire, and it spoke of survival, resilience, and the truth that grew from ash. Her words moved the crowd, and for a moment, the noise of resistance fell silent. But it wasn't enough. A month later, someone broke into the community center. Documents were stolen, hard drives erased, mural walls defaced with hateful messages. It was a warning, a message from those who believed kindness was weakness, that miracles had no place in policy. Victor was furious. He hadn't felt such heat since the crash that paralyzed him. But this time, the fire didn't burn him. It focused him. He called together everyone, donors, activists, teachers, kids, and together they planned something bold. The Walk of Ashes. It would be a symbolic march across the city, from the burned building where Amara had nearly died, to the gates of the government hall where decisions were made. 1,000 people walked, then 10,000. Victor at the front, cane in hand. Amara beside him, holding a sign that read, "We are still here." When they reached City Hall, there were no speeches, no violence, just silence. Powerful, unshakable silence. The kind that demands to be heard. It worked. The mayor, under pressure from the public, signed a resolution protecting the programs and funding for low-income neighborhoods. An independent investigation was launched into the sabotage, and Victor's foundation, once considered a fringe charity, was now a blueprint for urban renewal across the country. That night, Amara and Victor sat together on a rooftop, the city lights glowing below. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. He looked at her, his eyes still sharp despite the years and scars. "No, miracles are seeds, not endings. What we planted, others will have to grow." She leaned back, her notebook on her lap. "Then I better keep writing." He smiled. "And I better keep walking." They were older now, no longer the lost billionaire and the poor girl with leftover mac and cheese. They were builders of something sacred, proof that no matter where you begin, you can leave the world better than you found it. And though they didn't know what the future held, they were no longer afraid of it, because they had each other. The seasons changed again. Autumn spilled gold across the sidewalks, and the once-forgotten neighborhood thrived in its rebirth. Where broken streetlights once flickered, warm lamps now glowed. Gardens bloomed in alleyways. Children with full bellies danced beneath murals painted in shades of hope. But beneath the surface of peace, deeper currents stirred. Currents neither Victor nor Amara could ignore. Victor, now in his late 50s, felt time's quiet breath at the edge of his bones. The doctors warned him, while his mobility had returned, the damage from his old injury was irreversible in some ways. His body would grow weaker over time, no matter how strong his spirit remained. He understood mortality better than most. That's why he worked faster, built harder, listened deeper. He started mentoring a new generation of leaders, young minds who had grown up in poverty, in pain, in promise. His dream was no longer to lead everything, but to become unnecessary. Amara was nearly 17 now, taller, bolder. The fire that nearly killed her had left marks, not just on her skin, but in her voice. Her writing had found its way into national magazines and school textbooks. But fame had never tempted her. She still lived in the same building, still helped her mother cook, still walked the blocks with her notepad in hand, writing down the names of kids who needed shoes, mothers who needed medicine, dreams that needed someone to believe in them. But then came the letter, a white envelope, no return address. Inside, a photograph of Victor and Amara sitting together on the community bench. The image had been marked, red slashes drawn across their faces. A note, typed in cold black font. "You're not saving the world. You're poisoning it." Some of us haven't forgotten who Delacroix really is. Victor read it first. He didn't tell Amara immediately. He remembered the past. Before the crash. Before the miracle. He had made decisions. Cold ones. Calculated ones. He'd shut down factories overnight. Evicted tenant with a swipe of a pen. Raised prices that had made medicine unreachable. The world had called him a genius, a tycoon. But underneath that title, he had left damage in his wake. It haunted him still. Amara found the second letter herself. It was slipped under her door. This one had no picture, only a message. He's not who you think he is. Ask him about 43rd Street. She confronted him the next day. They sat on the rooftop of the youth center, the city sprawling beneath them like a maze of past mistakes. What happened on 43rd Street? She asked softly. Victor didn't lie. Years ago, one of his companies had bought out an entire block, low-income housing, under the promise of rebuilding. But it never happened. The project was abandoned. The people evicted. Some ended up homeless. A few died on the streets. He hadn't known every name, but he'd known enough and had turned away. Amara said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered, "And now?" "Now," Victor said, his voice heavy. "I'm trying to give back more than I ever took. But I can never rewrite those pages. Only write new ones." She nodded. "You will have to face them." "I know." So they did. Victor returned to 43rd Street with Amara at his side. Not with cameras or press or speeches, but with plans. He met with survivors. Families. Children of those who had once lived there. He apologized, not with words alone, but with action. Construction began within weeks. Not luxury condos, but cooperative housing built with the input of those who would live there. A health clinic, a school, a memorial garden with every name carved in stone. Still, the threats didn't stop. A firebomb was thrown at one of the construction sites. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. Someone powerful wanted the past to stay buried, and the present to remain broken. Victor and Amara could have backed down, but they didn't. They built security, yes, but they also built alliances, quiet ones, with people in the legal world, in the press, and in tech. A young hacker named Lydia helped trace the source of the threats to a real estate mogul who had once been Victor's partner, a man named Corman Tate. He had bought up slums all across the city, waiting for Victor's downfall so he could reclaim the narrative. But now, Victor had proof. Amara wrote the expose herself. It was titled, Ashes and Empires, The True Cost of Profit. It went viral. Public outcry erupted. Tate was brought before a congressional committee. Investigations bloomed. And though the road ahead remained dangerous, the power dynamic had shifted. For good. Amara was offered scholarships, TV deals, book contracts. She turned most of them down. She wanted to finish school. She wanted to open her own publishing house, to help other voices like Hayes, voices no one had believed in. Victor, tired but proud, finally began to let go. At the next community gathering, he handed her a single key. It was engraved with a single word. Yours. The community center, the foundation, the legacy, all of it, now in her hands. "I was once a man who built walls to keep people out," he said in his farewell speech. "But Amara taught me how to build doors, and now she'll teach the world how to walk through them." Tears fell, but not from sadness. They were tears of turning pages, of chapters beginning, of miracles that never end, but only evolve. The handover was quiet. No fireworks, no media frenzy, just a circle of people beneath the wide oak tree where Amara had once read her poems to an empty park. Victor, wearing a simple gray coat, clasped her hand, the key between them like a passing flame. "This doesn't mean the story ends," he said. "It means it's finally yours to write." Then he stepped back, not into the shadows, but into peace. He would never be forgotten, but it was no longer his time. Amara stood still after he left, her hand tightening around the old brass key. Around her were dozens, children from broken homes who now had books and beds, mothers who no longer feared eviction, teens who had once run with gangs but now taught younger ones how to paint murals and repair computers. She looked at each of them, and for the first time felt the full weight of leadership. Not power, but service. Not control, but the sacred responsibility of listening. She got to work. The youth center evolved into something far bigger than its walls. It became a living ecosystem, a hub of education, food distribution, mentorship, and creative space. She called it the lighthouse because, as she said at the first opening circle, hope doesn't just need a home. It needs to be seen, especially by those still lost in the dark. She hired staff, not professionals from outside, but people from the neighborhood, former addicts who now ran the counseling rooms, elderly women who taught cooking and childcare, local artists who created mosaic walls out of broken tiles and old mirrors. She opened a printing press in the basement, where stories from kids all over the city were published, bound, and given back to them, a physical proof that their voices mattered. And still, threats loomed. Corman Tate, though disgraced, was not the only one. Others like him, real estate titans, corrupt politicians, those who profited from poverty, saw the lighthouse not as a beacon, but as a threat. They began pushing legislation under the radar. A rezoning bill here, a funding freeze there, quiet tactics to choke the roots of everything Amara had grown. But she had learned from Victor, and more importantly, she had grown into her own. She launched a digital network, Voices of the Unheard, a platform where communities across the country could tell their own stories, share solutions, warn each other of rising threats. She worked with local law students to provide free legal counsel. She connected with farmers, trade workers, medical students, people who believed that rebuilding the world didn't need billionaires, just each other. She also kept writing. Each poem, each essay, each letter to lawmakers was crafted like a spell, words that didn't just speak pain, but direction. And when one of her essays, Cities That Breathe, was read aloud on the Senate floor, the tide began to turn again. Slowly, but certainly. Then came the storm. A hurricane, stronger than any before, hit the coast and pushed inland, flooding neighborhoods, including Hayes. The lighthouse's basement filled with water. Families were displaced. Food was scarce again. It was as if the story had circled back to the beginning. But this time, Amara wasn't a child waiting for a miracle. She was a miracle. She organized relief faster than the city did. Volunteers poured in from communities she had helped through her network. They brought boats, food, solar-powered generators. Victor, though retired, arrived with a blanket over his shoulders and a notebook in his lap. "I couldn't just stay home," he said, smiling through tired eyes. Together, they waded through floodwaters, checking houses, delivering supplies, reading stories to children trapped in shelters. And when the waters receded, the lighthouse stood, damaged, but standing. That night, Amara sat on the roof once again, the stars reflected in the puddles below. She opened her journal and began writing a new chapter, not just for her, but for the world still struggling to believe that broken things could be beautiful again. Excerpt from her journal, titled The Fifth Season. They thought it ended with fire, with a plane crash, with poverty, with pain. But every time, the story found another breath, another seed, another voice. I am not special because I was chosen. I am here because I chose to stay. And I will keep choosing, even when they threaten, even when it floods, even when they forget my name, because I remember theirs, all of theirs. And if I keep remembering, if we all do, then maybe this world can finally remember itself too. Years passed. The city that once crumbled in silence now pulsed with life. Streets once marred by abandonment now sang with color, laughter, and purpose. Gardens bloomed where rubble once lay. Music drifted from schoolyards. Murals told stories on every wall, some painted in memory, others in dream. And in the center of it all stood the lighthouse, not just as a building, but as a living testament to everything that had once seemed impossible. Amara stood at its doors one crisp morning, her fingers grazing the names carved into the wood. Names of children who once feared they would never grow up. Names of elders who kept the community alive when the world turned its back. Names of those who believed, even when belief was costly. She was now in her late 20s. Time had deepened her voice but not dulled her flame. Her braids were longer, her posture steadier, her eyes the same, still sharp with awareness, still soft with hope. She had become a teacher, a writer, an organizer, a founder, but above all, she had remained a witness. a witness to what love and defiance could do. Victor Delacroix had passed 2 winters ago. Quietly, peacefully, in a small home overlooking the river, with Amara at his side and sunlight spilling across his hands. His last words were simple. "We did something, didn't we?" And Amara whispered, "No, you helped me believe I could." He was buried beneath the old oak tree, the same tree where the story had truly begun. A simple stone marked the grave. Victor Delacroix. He once had everything. Then he gave it away, and found more than he ever imagined. After his passing, there was an ache, not just in Amara, but in the city. He had been more than a billionaire turned benefactor. He had been proof that even the most broken people could choose redemption, not through apologies, but through action. Amara kept going. She expanded the lighthouse across the country, each one adapted to the needs of its community. No two were the same. Some were libraries, others clinics, others gardens, but all of them carried one core belief, that everyone, no matter how forgotten, holds the light of a miracle inside them. She never took credit, always said it belonged to the people. But those who knew her, the ones who'd once sat with her in burned buildings or watched her read poems on shelter floors, knew better. And so, on her 30th birthday, the city unveiled surprise. At the edge of the bay, where the storm waters had once surged, now stood a statue, not towering, but humble. A girl in braids holding a container of macaroni. Her eyes were carved upward, toward the sky. Her plaque read, "Amara Wells." She asked for a miracle, then became one. That night, as fireworks lit the sky and crowds gathered, Amara stood quietly at the back, watching, listening, holding her journal. Later, under starlight, she wrote the final entry she would ever write about her journey. Excerpt from Amara's final journal. "I thought this would be the end of the story, but there are no endings, only echoes. I was just a hungry girl once. My shoes had holes. My voice was small. I didn't ask for riches. I asked to be heard. I asked for one miracle. I gave a man leftovers. He gave me a future. Together, we gave the world a reason to believe again. If you find this one day, child, whether you live in a mansion or shelter, remember this. You are not what the world expects you to be. You are not your hunger. You are not your scars. You are not your silence. You are a seed. You are a story waiting to bloom. So trade what little you have with courage. And wait, the miracle will answer. And if it doesn't, become it." That was the end of the book, but not of the legacy. Children still pass the statue on the bay and ask, "Is that really her?" And someone always answers, "Yes." And if she could, so can you. The poor girl with leftovers became a light for millions. The paralyzed millionaire became her first believer. Together, they didn't just change the world. They proved it could be changed. The end.